guys, welcome to another tutorial on how to do logical reasoning question. This is an introductory tutorial, basically introducing you to the general background, introduce terminology, instill concepts, and different procedures, so then you understand the moving parts of a logical reasoning question. Okay, so let's get started. In any logical reasoning question, you're going to have specifically three components. Okay, you're going to have the stimulus problem, you're going to have the question types, this we also call the prompt, and you're going to have the credited answer, okay, or the answer choices. So let's go into specific detail of the different components. So the stimulus, what is the stimulus? Well, the stimulus has information that is designed to stimulate or engage your interest. The first thing you want to do is you want to read this first, you want to read it slowly, and then you want to determine what you're being asked. The second component would be the prompt. The prompt basically tells you what the question is about. So all logical reasoning questions are classified by the prompt. Basically, the prompt identifies what information is of importance in the stimulus. It should be the first thing you read. So there's going to be specifically 10 types of logical reasoning prompts. Okay, so after you read the stimulus, you want to read the prompt and then quickly ID the different question type. Okay, and then of course, once you ID the different question type, know what bucket it falls in, then you can have a procedure or a heuristic rule of thumb on how to tackle it. So that's the second step. The third component to any logical reasoning question would be the credited answer choice. You're going to have specifically 5 choices. One will be the credited, or in layman's word we call it the right answer choice, and 4 incorrect answer choice. So at this point, what you want to do is focus on the scope of the answer choice. Is it beyond the scope? Is it too strong, too weak, that kind of thing? You want to focus on the qualifiers. Qualifiers are basically like those lawyerly statements that are so highly qualified that it basically works on everything, right? You want to look for something that's kind of vague. But again, this is going to specific detail, and I'm going to give you specific heuristics or procedure for every single question type. So this is just a general survey, but these are the things you kind of want to look for at this stage, okay? And then also logical force. So let me define what logical force is. A logical force is nothing more than the strength of an argument. Is the argument strong? Is it weak? Is it deductive, inductive, that kind of thing? Okay, so we're going to get into all that. Now, let's discuss logic terminology, because you kind of have to understand terminology, because in these tutorials, I'm going to throw some terms around, and it's important that we're all on the same pages. Okay, so let's get into it. Premises or premise. What are premise or premises? Well, these are basically statements or evidence that justify the claim of an argument. So you can think of these are like the evidence that support the conclusion. Okay, they're always going to be declarative sentences, and when you see a premise, you want to quickly identify and tease apart premises from conclusion, because you need to know what are the evidence and what are going to be the conclusion that those premises support. Now, one way to do this is basically to look for premise indicator, but later on when we're dealing with tougher logical reasoning questions, it's not going to be so obvious, but I'll show you some ways to look for it. But the easier questions will have logical indicator, and I'll go into those with you and tell you what they are. Conclusion. Conclusions are what? Conclusions are nothing more than statements that follow from the premises that are given. The definition would be statements that follow from the premises by means of an argument. So at this point, you quickly want to just determine what are premises and what are conclusions. So you want to tease those things apart. Okay? And again, conclusions, just like premises, have keywords. So when you see the keywords, that's like a dead giveaway to tell you these are conclusions. But however, later on, we're dealing with logical reasoning questions that are much tougher. You have to be careful, because they're going to give you conclusions that look like they're conclusions, but they're really actually premises. And I'll teach you how to distinguish those two. Now, a conclusion, you want to ask yourself, does the conclusion justify the claim offered by the premises? That's really important. Does the conclusion justify what is given to you based on the evidence? Next thing, the next term that you want to know, or the next major distinction would be the difference between deductive and inductive reasoning. Okay, so deductive reasoning, what is deductive reasoning? Deductive reasoning is a reasoning process that follows from one or more statements to reach a conclusion. So this is basically general to specific logic, or we can call it general to particular logic. Okay, so it's top-down logic. So the right answer will be similar to math. So when you're given like 2 plus 2, that's going to be the premise. The conclusion will be 4. So you don't have any other like middle ground. You're always going to arrive at 4. You're going to see deductive reasoning on formal logic, and pretty much deductive reasoning are going to be part of the analytical reasoning section. Colloquially, we'll call it games, okay? Same thing. Next thing you need to know would be the inductive reasoning. So the inductive reasoning will be the other side of the two strands of logic, okay? So this is basically the reasoning process in which the statements offer in support of the conclusion is either strong or it's going to be weak. Okay, so it's not so obvious like in a deductive argument where it's going to be black or white. There's going to be a range. This is going to be particular to general claims. So this is basically normal reasoning. You draw a bigger conclusion based on a few given evidence that you have. Okay, now that gets a little tricky because we have to determine first if these pieces of evidence are representative of a bigger class. That's why we call it particular to general claims. So this is the same thing as bottom-up logic, because you're reasoning from a small set and you're making a bigger conclusion from that smaller set. So this is probabilistic reasoning, very similar to statistics. The conclusion will have a range that's going to go from weak to strong, unlike deductive argument where it's either black or white, yes or no. So let's get into these other terms. So what's a valid argument? You're going to hear these words thrown around a lot by logicians, and a lot of LSAT instructors will throw these terms around a lot. What is a valid argument? A valid argument is when the conclusion logically follows from the premise. And when I say logically follow, it has to be, it's a strict form of logic where there's basically no middle ground. You either have a valid argument or an invalid argument. And this only applies to deductive arguments. So the argument is going to be binary in nature. Like I mentioned earlier, it's going to be yes or no, valid, invalid. And there's no middle ground. These kind of reasoning are actually pretty easy to detect and spot because they're pattern driven and they follow a strict template, which I will introduce to you later when we get into the whole tutorial about conditional reasoning and formal logic. Now, the other side of the yes-no statement would be invalid. So invalid is just the opposite side of valid. Okay, so it applies only to deductive arguments. It's when the conclusion does not, I repeat, does not follow logically from the premises. Okay, so again, this is like the yes-no. So this would be equivalent to the no aspect of a binary statement. There's no middle ground and it's pattern-driven. Okay, so enough with deductive reasoning. Finish it off with the 5-step procedure on how to handle any logical reasoning question. Step 1, what you want to do is you want to identify the question. You want to spend no more than 10 seconds to scan the question type and figure out what you're being asked. Okay. Step 2, read purposefully. You have to determine, am I dealing with a deductive argument, inductive argument, what type of argument am I dealing with, okay, in the problem set. So spend about 30 seconds to do this. Read this, fully understand it. Now, at this stage, you want to evaluate the argument. Now, you really want to determine, am I dealing with formal logic or am I dealing with inductive reasoning? So if it's formal logic, it's going to be like math. You can follow a strict heuristic or a procedure, which I will introduce to you later on how to follow this. Inductive reasoning, remember, inductive reasoning will range from weak to strong. So there's a lot of gray area here. So that's step 3. Step 4, you want to basically, if you're dealing with a deductive or inductive, it doesn't matter. You want to isolate premises from conclusion. Okay, so this is the isolation part. This is when you tease them all apart. Now, all this is done at a very quick stage because remember, for logical reasoning, you have about 1 minute and 30 seconds to do this. So you can't spend too much time. What you want to do now is you want to tease out the premise and the conclusion. Now you put it in the final stage, step 5. It's called integration. We're going to put it all together. And then at this stage in the game, you should be able to know specific heuristics for every single question type, which we will go into way more detail when we get into specific strategy for the different types of question. And remember, for logical reasoning question, we can classify it into 10 different types. Those are the steps. Those are the 5 steps you would need to do and follow in order to handle any type of logical reasoning question. All right, guys. So don't forget to like, share, and comment. And I'll see you guys next time. Thank you.